archery. It's something that I never presumed I would ever try. In fact, the closest thing I ever got to archery was seeing Legolas kill orcs in Lord of the Rings, and this old Nerf bow, which is, I don't know, somewhere near 8 years old at the moment. I mean, there are old videos of baby Ricky using this to knock down pins and cans and whatnot. But like I said a second ago, this was the closest I ever got to the sport and or pastime of archery. So you might be asking how this interest came about in the first place, because, I mean, if you're in my government class, you probably know that I'm not terribly into weapons or anything like that. I mean, guns aren't really my thing. So, I mean, I suppose naturally archery might seem like kind of an oddball subject for me to form my whole project around. But honestly, that was one of the reasons why I actually got interested in it, because I simply had never done anything like it ever before. But in general, my interest in it first came earlier this year when I was pondering a new unexplored sport for me to try that did not involve me joining a team, nor involved me getting injured in any way. A few of my good friends had been doing archery for a number of years, and while I had always heard about it, I didn't really consider the possibility of trying it. But then I was convinced by John McCormick and Logan Doge, two fellow archery shooters who were multi-year veterans when it came to archery. After discussing the idea a little bit, I decided to try it. A few of my friends helped me get set up with the Lunenburg Sportsman Club, which is where I would always end up shooting, and my first official day was March 4th. When I first arrived at the Sportsman Club, which is accessed through a dirt road that is kind of scary to drive on at night, I came to realize how tremendously unprepared I felt compared to the other more seasoned people that were there as well. Of course, it was normal for me to not have my own bow and whatnot because I was just starting out, but I still felt very out of place. Both Logan and John were doing some engineering magic with their bows before they began shooting, screwing things in and out, looking down the scope of the bow to make sure it was in the right place, you know, all that good stuff, while I just kind of meandered around a little bit, you know, trying to find a bathroom I could sit in the meantime so I didn't look completely clueless in front of everyone else. But eventually I was given a bow of my own. Now obviously it was just a rental, but it was still pretty cool. I was told it was fairly new and that I was privileged to use it considering I hadn't shot an arrow before. I was also given this little gadget to go on my right hand, aka the one that would pull back the arrow to actually shoot it. And I also got this little arm guard just in case the string ever skimmed against my arm when I shot. I was of course shooting a right-handed bow, but interestingly, that was not determined by if I was right-handed or left-handed. In fact, it was determined if I was right-eye dominant or left-eye dominant. For example, you could see here, John, who is a righty for everything else to my knowledge, was forced to use a left-handed bow because his left eye was dominant, while me and Logan were able to use a right-handed one because our right eye was dominant. And you could also see a difference in the actual structure, I guess, of the bows, as John was using a compound bow, while me and Logan were using the more classic recurve ones. Then was the time for me to shoot my first real arrow. I was pretty scared, to be honest, I'm not gonna lie, but looking back on it, there was really no need to be scared because it really caught me off guard just how smooth the process of shooting the arrow actually was. I thought it would kind of rattle my head back and forth. I thought it would be much louder for some reason when shooting. I had seen a lot of videos of people either misfiring or hurting themselves while shooting, so I was a little intimidated by that, go figure. But there was actually no need at all for me to be a little timid beforehand. I started by shooting 10 yards, which was apparently a normal place to start for a newcomer like myself, but on my second day I graduated to the 20-yard target, and that was when I truly started to realize that there was a lot more to shooting an arrow than just shooting an arrow. See that lady over there? Her name is Carmen, and she was the one who ended up teaching me everything I needed to know, a mentor of some sorts. So she's the owner of the Sportsman Club, so when I began the project, I knew she was the person to talk to, and she was very helpful with the process of the project itself. I remember going in to talk to her about it, about how I will be filming throughout different days and, you know, things like that, and she was very understanding. I mean, to be fair, I remember her looking at me like I was an alien when I explained that to her, But, she understood it enough, and she ended up being very helpful in the grand scheme of things, and she, understood enough to know why I was there in the first place. So Carmen ended up teaching me not only the general gist of how to shoot with a bow, but also the little tweaks here and there that you wouldn't think would really make a difference, but they definitely did. Little bits of information like how I should pull back with my shoulder instead of just my arm, and also how I should hold the cocked back arrow more under my chin than on the side of my face like this. I mean, I even remember seeing the lines on the floor and thinking, okay, you just stand behind this to shoot the arrow. But no, you're actually supposed to kind of straddle the line diagonally, and that was the correct way to shoot. And I couldn't believe how many minute details went into shooting an arrow. There were also some other daily archery activities that I didn't really account for, such as screwing in your target to the wall and sharing a station with someone, of which you would get either the top or the bottom, and then obviously you would take turns going, wait for the other person to finish. I mean, not that any of these things were inconveniences of any kind, but it was just something that I wasn't really expecting, I guess. But perhaps the feature of archery that I anticipated the least was the small yet noticeable toll it would take on your body physically. When I first started shooting, I felt totally fine. I wasn't really getting tired or anything, but then about halfway through my second day of shooting, I really started to feel it in my arms, and after, my forearm would be kind of sore, and during shooting, literally when I would have the arrow back here, I would begin to shake uncontrollably, which was kind of embarrassing for anyone watching me closely, and it was also very distracting because, I'm trying to stand there, focus on where I'm aiming, and then all of a sudden I begin shaking, and my arm feels like a noodle, and when I let go, I feel like it's about to rip off with the arrow. It was, honestly, it was pretty distracting, and it was annoying because I couldn't control it. It ended up being really prominent, to be honest, and I mean, who knows, it might just be a fairly normal phenomenon. I mean, I remember asking a few of my friends, and they also said that they would get that sometimes, but I mean, I couldn't help but think of my physique, because as if you couldn't tell, I'm not the strongest, most ripped guy on the planet, so who knows, maybe I just wasn't built for pulling a string repeatedly. So the process of shooting would go something like me letting a rip on 3 arrows at a time, then waiting for the other guys to wrap up because I was usually the first one to finish, which shows that I hadn't really fully developed a pace that worked for me consistently. I would kind of just shoot the 3 arrows and see where they would go, while a lot of other people clearly had rituals that they would follow. But, I mean, come on, I wasn't good enough to fake something like that and act like it was making a big difference for me. So after everyone had shot, the leader of the group, usually Carmen, would yell clear, and that would give us the go to go and look at our excellent work down at the other end. As you could see, I was not terribly consistent at first. I mean, I was surprised I never found one of my arrows, on the roof or maybe in the knee of the guy next to me. But after seeing our shots, we would take the arrows out of the target, walk back, and just rinse and repeat from there. And around this time, I learned about etiquette in archery, which is another thing I didn't even know existed. For example, you're not supposed to leave your post while someone next to you is in the motion of shooting. So even if you yourself are out of arrows, you shouldn't walk away immediately because it may distract the person next to you. Another example is actually more of a safety regulation, and that is to, of course, when you have your arrow back like this, you should never turn around and face the crowd because, I probably don't need to explain why that is off limits, but apparently there was a kid who had done that multiple times before, and once he was pointed out to me, I made sure to stay clear of him, just in case he ever got any funny ideas. I also actually began to get an idea of how I wanted to shoot more than what was expected of me. For example, I mentioned something about keeping the back of the arrow under your chin, but after shooting a lot, I developed the tendency to keep it on the side of my face, and that ended up working better for me, even though it wasn't the correct way to do it. So yeah, I developed a few different, just personal cues that would help me shoot better. And so yeah, that was, a little sign of improvement at least. Also, with a lot of these clips, you could see that I was not wearing my patented L hat. That's because when I would pull the string back, the brim of the hat would get in the way of that. So there were 2 equally bad choices that I could make. I could either take off my hat completely and show off my award-winning haircut, or I could put the hat on backwards and look like the biggest tool in the building. So I switched off between the two, but it didn't affect my performance at all, which is something I know you guys were so worried about. So as archery progressed, I was slowly but surely improving. Obviously, there were times I scuffled, but there were also times that I felt pretty okay with what I did. You know, there was a bit of consistency here and there. I never got a Robin Hood shot on 2 arrows. If you don't know what that is, it's basically when you shoot an arrow that is already stuck in the target, you shoot it and it just splits it perfectly down the middle. I never did that because it is fairly uncommon, but I actually did catch one on camera of a guy who was also there that was shooting with us.
That was a beautiful rifle. Ooh.
You can't see the actual arrow, but I don't know, I thought his reaction was a little goofy. But anyway, I got to take my targets home most of the time, which was a great way to physically track my progress as I went along. But instead of just looking at the punctures on the target to discern whether I was improving or not, I was taught how to keep score by my good friend, Johnny Mack. So basically, on each different kind of target, there were 3 different ones that I ended up seeing, but I always used the classic one right there on the left. But as you would expect, each circle corresponded with a certain number of points, and that gave you an efficient method of keeping track of your improvements. So after I concluded going to the Sportsman Club for each of my sessions, I took a look at all of my targets and calculated the scores of each of them in an effort to see an upward progression. Now, because I obviously didn't do this to become an ace at shooting arrows, I just did this to see if there was in fact an improvement that could be once again physically tracked instead of just me sitting here and saying, oh yeah, I sucked at first, but I did a little bit better at the end. So I think the targets were definitely a good way to see that. So here I have 4 of my targets, each taken about 2 weeks from each other, shown in order of the date I shot them. On the first one, I scored a 119, then 136, then 155, and finally 157, which ended up being my highest. That wasn't my last one though, because actually on the final day we officially scored them while there out of 30 arrows, which is the regulation for official matches apparently. The other targets were just for fun at the moment, and I scored them after the fact, and they also varied in the amount of arrows I shot because, again, the regulation was 30 and that was my last day, but with other ones I would just do kind of, you know, stay there for an hour or two and just do as many as I felt like it. It was upwards of like 30 to 35 and sometimes a little lower than that, but mostly it was like, you know, 30 to 40, I would say. But after my final session, I was given this little thing with these 4 pins on it, which of course corresponded with different points. This one was 30 points, 50 points, and 100 points. But the green one was for, I'm not sure to be honest. I mean, I don't know, just for showing up, for hitting the target maybe. They gave you this complimentary green pin. So not only are my targets a good representation of my work, but I also have this now, which is pretty cool, and I was actually pretty proud of myself to get it. And that's really it. I had a ton of fun making this project. I know just watching this may make it seem either boring or very straightforward, or both, in fact, but it was definitely neither of those to me, at least. I was actually reminded of golf a lot during this experience, as it's a sport very based on technique and consistency with some etiquette sprinkled in there, and you feel equally as angry when you get a bad shot in golf as you would get a bad shot in archery. Just the only difference there is in golf, I could pickaxe the ground with my club when I get a terrible shot, while with archery, I can't exactly snap the bow over my knee. But I was surprised with how similar they were nonetheless, and specifically with this, I was surprised with how much I enjoyed it in general. I did a ton of filming, mostly on weekdays because there were classes on Saturdays, which meant the building was overrun by little children with bows, so I didn't exactly want to walk around with a camera scaring the customers away or anything like that. But still, and a big thanks to John McCormick and Logan Doge for teaching me a lot of helpful information and never losing patience in me. It was greatly appreciated. And that's it. So any questions can now be answered by my future self. So thank you all very much for watching.